There is an unfortunate tendency to only think about PTSD in the context of a post-World War society. Whilst this was the beginning of our modern understanding of PTSD and a severe peak in cases, it's by far from the first time that it was witnessed in human history. Although it was hidden under many other names, people have been dealing with trauma since the beginning of time. In the century prior to World War One, there was a spike in cases of a particular type of PTSD, although the minds of the time had no idea it was such. By the mid-1800s, the railway boom was well underway. This made people more mobile, and hundreds were travelling, seizing the opportunity they never had before. However, with this new technology came risks. Railway accidents were shockingly more common than we may imagine. During these early days of rail travel, carriages were mainly made of wood, with no covers or restraints, which left passengers vulnerable to flying debris, general instability, and a greater risk of being thrown from the carriage should something go wrong. And frequently, lack of communication between stations, engineers, and those working on board would often result in crashes or derailment. It was those who survived these crashes that would suffer from the trauma. However, the first analytical study into this phenomenon was not due to concern about public health or well-being, rather it was economically motivated. Railway companies were beginning to receive letters demanding compensation for accidents, which although left no physical injury, claimants suffered nonetheless. Naturally, these reports were scrutinised. Railway companies didn't want to lose out on money or appear weak in the eyes of the public. At worst, they feared they were being scammed. Common symptoms among these claimants, things such as shortness of breath, shaking, a sudden feeling of panic, stiffness in the neck and joints, insomnia, irritability, anxiety, and poor concentration. In 1866, this caught the attention of English surgeon John Erik Erikson. Danish-born British surgeon, was highly respected within his field, and by 1880 he would become the president of the Royal College of Surgeons. In a series of essays he looked into this mysterious condition. Though he presented no physical evidence to his findings, they do indeed tell us a lot about the mentality of Victorian England. In this time, mental illness carried a heavy stigma to it. People showing any signs of mental illness were viewed as weak, inferior, or driven to madness by misuse of substances such as alcohol, ergo making it their fault. Often mental illnesses were contributed to a physical factor, thus earning more sympathy and understanding from the people. Moreover, doctors would be more willing to help the sufferers, rather than simply locking them up in an asylum. So this was the direction that Erikson took. He theorized that the spine, much like the neck, was prone to concussion. Much like a concussion to the head, it could affect a person's physicality and mental well-being, although via a physical stimulus, making it more manageable. His conclusions gave these people more sympathy and saved them from the asylums, as well as earning many the compensation they rightly deserved. But Erikson's conclusions also had an adverse effect. People in general became afraid of suffering from this illness, which was dubbed railway spine. Although railway travel was safer as time went on, people began taking measures to avoid possibly being too roughly shaken and suffering from this condition. Many paintings that exemplify this very well. Images of people in luxury train carriages, yet dressed up in thick clothing, regardless to the season or the comfortable surroundings of the cabin they were in. This exemplifies the fear that they felt. This bulky clothing was not for comfort, but rather because they feared being shaken too much, and somehow damaging their spine. As Erikson's essays implied that even a sudden shake could cause it. There is a curious case of a person suffering from railway spine. A highly influential writer political commentator and columnist, whose work is still referenced 200 years later, this being Charles Dickens. In 1865, Dickens was on board a train heading to London, but while crossing a viaduct, the train was derailed due to a piece of track being removed for engineering work. 10 people were killed and 40 more injured, as the first-class carriages fell from the bridge. Dickens's own carriage did not fall, but hung perilously over the edge of the bridge, allowing Dickens and his mother to escape unharmed. However, Dickens did remain at the scene and help tend to the wounded, giving them whiskey for the pain until relief arrived. Many of Dickens's friends and his own son claimed that he was never the same after that accident. He became very reluctant to travel on rail. Anxiety increased, and visitors to his home would claim that sometimes, especially while sitting down, he would tense up and shake, or become very vacant and mentally clouded. Dickens would die 5 years to the day after this train accident. However, opinion on the validity and the treatment of this condition was still hotly debated for the next few decades. In 1886, the Royal College of Physicians met in Vienna, and railway spine, or Erichsen's disease, was part of their discussion. During this meeting, German neurologist Hermann Oppenheim agreed with Erichsen's conclusion that it was a concussion of the spine and subsequent brain injury that caused this illness. However, he was opposed by French physicians and a handful of British ones, who were adamant that the illness was caused by a form of hysteria, most notably of which was Jean-Martin Charcot, a notable pathologist from France. These troubles, however, were not purely European, as there were additional cases arising in America. In 1890, an article was published in the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal, which discussed Erichsen's disease. It too went by the original theory that Erichsen's disease was caused by an injury to the spine. But it includes an interesting social dynamic. The pioneering treatment was surgery to the spine, which of course required money, something not all of the public could afford at the time. Even given compensation in those rare cases they were paid out for their troubles, spinal surgery would be well out the reach of most of the population. It also voices a concern for the long-term health of the patients, as, much like modern PTSD and our understanding of anxiety, it became more apparent that people were suffering heart conditions, and in the worst cases, leading to death. The journal also points towards a classism in society that the author is deeply against. In both British and American societies, it was a common belief that the poor were poor by fault of their own, and would use any easy outlet to gain money or avoid working, which of course led to paranoia that people may fake this disease in order to get compensation or time off work. All of this, of course, just highlights the classist mindset of the 19th century. In hindsight, we know that spinal surgery and dressing oneself in thickly padded clothes whenever you go on the train did not prevent or cure the so-called condition railway spine. There was a decline in cases as the century went on. This is mainly due to safety changes on trains in general, rather than any sort of credible treatment for this trauma. With the decline in cases and World War I on the horizon, railway spine became an unfortunate relic of medical history.